Hello there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Here's what's at issue this week.
We found that overpayments of $4.6 billion were made to ineligible individuals.
The Auditor General released a report detailing COVID spending. While the report praised the government for the speed of its response and support, it also found billions of dollars of aid sent to ineligible recipients. The Liberal government defends the supports and say they have a plan to try and recoup some of the money.
We have a strong plan to conduct post-payment verification, and we are carrying out this work methodically.
So, was getting the money out fast the right approach? And is there a lesson for the government with other benefits going forward? Let's bring in our panelists. Chantal Hebert, Elamin, Abdelmahmoud, Althia Raj, and Andrew Coyne. Good to see everyone. Elamin, I'm going to start with you this week. What do you make of what the Auditor General had to say and what this does, I guess, for a broader narrative the Conservatives have tried to construct around how the federal government manages money?
I mean, there's really, to me, two elements of this story. One is that it actually seemed generally pretty good for the Liberals. The fact that they got $211 billion out the door and then they made an error in 4.6 billion of those. You know, sure, that is a large amount of money, but all in all, that's a 2% margin of error. Generally speaking, in a crisis as large as COVID, I would say that's actually a pretty good story for them. But where there was an unforced error, I would say, was hearing a minister talk about the politicization of this report. There's an Auditor General that is just doing her job and sort of trying to make the point that even calling out those errors was a political problem. I think that was where the Liberals stepped in it, because really it was an unforced error. They didn't need to go in that direction. And so they gave the opposition more ammunition to turn this into, a 2-day story, a 3-day story, when it would have been, I think a 1-day story maybe.
Yeah, that was the Minister of National Revenue, Minister Leboutier. Chantal, what did you make of what the Auditor General had to say about the speed with which the government did this, but also the amount of money overall, because it was 4 billion for CERB, but it was a much bigger number when it came to overpayments writ large.
Oh, I wish we'd learned from the last time that we shut the country down and told people they couldn't go to work and earn money to pay for their mortgages and rent. So I too agree that speed was more important than accounting at that point. I also agree that the messaging about accounting was not great. But I am curious to know what a Conservative government would have done in the same place. Would it have put in a lot of requirements for all those people who overnight could not show up for work? Or would it not have done exactly the same thing?
Andrew.
I think most people understand in the immediate crisis of getting the money out the door, it probably was a good approach to just ask questions later. The problem is they didn't ask the questions later. They didn't ask the questions up front, and they didn't go after them afterwards to verify how much of the money had gone to whom, how much had gone to people who didn't deserve it. The Auditor General has a figure of $4.6 billion for sure, but another $27 billion that she says needs to be investigated. I think that in the government's defense now is to say, for their rather lackadaisical approach, was to say, well, we can't go after everybody to get the money back because it wouldn't be worth it. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to go after absolutely everybody. But it's not just about getting the money back. It's finding out how much do we actually send out to people who didn't deserve it. If it's at the $4.6 billion level, as awful as that sounds, I agree with Elamin, that's a 2% loss rate. If it's at the $32 billion level, that's a much worse catastrophe. And the other question we need to find out is who it went to. If we find out that some of it or some section of it went to organized crime, for example, as we were warned a year ago that it might, that would put rather a different color on it. So the government's unwillingness to poke about in this is perhaps not entirely coincidental.
Well, is it unwillingness to poke about, Althia, given they've got some of that money back for CERB in particular? They say they're going to go and see what else they can get back. I take Andrew's point. I'm not sure how aggressive it's been, but do you think that that's realistic, Althia?
Well, that's what the government is saying. Basically, I agree with Andrew. You have two different visions, and it's rather interesting that the argument is being put forward by the AG and not actually by the Conservative Party or any other opposition party. There is $4.6 billion in overpayments. Then there is at least, the AG says, $27.4 billion in money that may have gone to individuals and employers who were likely ineligible. And the AG is basically saying, the government has to follow its own law, and it has to go after these people who are likely ineligible. The fairness of the tax system depends on it, the appearance of being just, of being fair, of everybody being treated equally. That doesn't mean that the government can't put certain people on deferred payment plans, for example, not charge them interest. But the AG is saying you should be going after all these people who likely cheated. And the government is saying, well, we don't have the resources for it, so we're just going to go after some people that we think are grossly unlikely to have been ineligible. So you have two very different visions. One saying, well, some of the people who cheated, we're probably going to let them pass because we don't want to put the resources to it. But it's not just that. The government in its legislation gave itself only 36 months to go after people who are likely ineligible. Nothing is preventing them from giving themselves an extension. They can bring forward a piece of legislation that says, actually, we need more time to do this. Like the dental care plan, for example, is giving people, or CRA, 6 years to go back after the fact. They're saying, keep your receipts for 6 years. So why can't the government give itself more time? Like, it's frankly really strange that none of the opposition parties seem to be making this argument, and it's only the AG who's up there saying, hey, you're not following your own rules.
Well, maybe they will after this panel, because that's a awfully good point. Chantal.
Well, yeah.
Oh, wait, Andrew, then Chantal.
Just to reiterate a point, we need to know the amount. If it's anywhere close to the higher end, if it's $30 billion out of a $200 billion program, if they misspent 15% of it, that's the greatest fiscal catastrophe in the history of the country. That would just be extraordinary. I hope and pray it's nowhere near that amount. But right now, all we know is that the Auditor General said at least that much is suspicious and needs to be investigated.
Chantal.
I've always been under the impression that the CRA does pick and choose and doesn't go after everyone that it suspects, not because there are not more than the people that it catches, but because it would be a squandering of resources. I don't disagree that we need a better accounting. But I am mindful of the fact that this is a non-precedented event and that the remedies would require unprecedented resources. Maybe that's where all those resources should go within the federal government. Maybe not.
Last word to you, Elamin, on this.
I'm with Chantal on that. I think the government's larger problem is impressionistic, right? It's sort of the notion of, are they seized enough with this issue to pursue it or not? And I think right now, given the approach of saying, we're going to pursue some of it, but we're not really concerned with following up on this entire amount and sort of bringing the whole account to the table, I think that is the bigger problem, and that is the opening that they give to the opposition parties to attack them on this, and the Conservatives are rightly, I think, seizing on that laid-back attitude.
The Mississauga-Lakeshore by-election is set for this Monday. The riding was previously held by Liberal MP Sven Spengeman, who stepped down in May, and the Conservatives have not held it since 2011. By-elections are often seen as referendums on government performance, but this is also the first test for the Conservative leader. So what should we expect from the mini midterm? That was my friend Aaron Weary that coined that term. Let's bring in at issue Chantal, Elamin, Althia, and Andrew. And we're sort of riffing off of Chantal's column this week. So I'll start with you, Chantal, on why this by-election is so important to both the Liberals and the Conservatives this time.
It's not important to the makeup of the House of Commons. Let's agree on that. But it is the kind of riding that the Conservatives need to win if they're going to form a government. And indeed, it is a riding that the Conservatives won under Stephen Harper in 2011 when they won a majority government. Now, over the three elections that followed, they always managed to get 36 to 40% of the vote. So the Conservatives are competitive in that riding. The Liberals want to hold it. And I think it's a test on two scores. Yes, it is the first test of Pierre Poilievre's tenure as Conservative leader. So at the very least, he has to do as well or better than Aaron O'Toole did. But it is also a test of his communication strategy, the under the radar, let's not talk to mainstream media. As part of his campaigning for the by-election, he held a press conference in Toronto, but invited none of the Star, Globe and Mail, CTV, CBC. So maybe that works, maybe that doesn't. I don't think it does, but for sure, one way or the other, the leader who wins on Monday will get momentum, at least within his own party, and the loser will have to deal with a bit of a morale issue.
And Althia, when you talk to Conservatives and Liberals, what are they telling you about Monday and how it might unfold, and their concerns about some of the things Chantal's saying?
That it will mean a lot if they win, but mean nothing if they lose.
Yeah, right.
I think Chantal's point about the communication strategy is really interesting. And one thing that was notable this week is that Pierre Poilievre actually came out and did his second scrum with the Parliamentary Press Gallery. It was a topic that was ripe for the taking. This the story we're not talking about, but about the RCMP giving a contract to basically a company owned by the Chinese government to look at to maintain security infrastructure for the RCMP. So a big black mark on the Liberal government there. But part of Mr. Poilievre's strategy is to depress Liberal voters, and you can't depress Liberal voters if you don't talk to them. So if you're only sending out tweets and Facebook posts to people you've already converted or people you think are receptive to your message, but you're ignoring the other part of your calculation, which is making sure Liberals are so disgusted by politics that don't show up to the polls, it's a failing strategy. So it was very interesting to hear him take advantage of that issue right before the by-election and just after Chantal had written that story to make that point.
Maybe it was because of it. Who knows? Yeah, I hadn't thought about that point about how you also talk to mainstream media to affect your opponent and turnout as opposed to just your own message. Andrew, what are you going to be watching for on Monday?
Well, I frankly think much more of the pressure's on the Liberals in this. This is a riding that they have won in 9 of the last 10 elections. True, not by huge margins, but 9 of the last 10 is pretty telling. So if the Conservatives are unable to take the riding, that'll be a disappointment to them, but it wouldn't tell you a huge amount unless they drop a fair bit in the popular vote. If they don't do as well as they have in past elections, that would tell you one thing. But if the Liberals were to lose this election, if the Conservatives were to win it, I think that would be quite a signal that there was actual discontent out there that manifested in people's willingness to come to the polls, not just in the poll numbers. And if I were the Liberals, I would take that as with a great deal of concern. Bearing that in mind, of course, one by-election is not necessarily a bellwether of anything, but it would certainly be a warning bell.
Yeah, I mean, both sides are telling the Liberals and the Conservatives, I haven't asked everybody, say to me it's still pretty tight at this stage. So, I mean, that's what they would say, I would suppose. But, Elamin, what do you think it says about, being a test for either of those leaders?
I mean, I think we are at a moment where we are desiring a test, right? We're desiring some kind of piece of evidence. At least like people who talk about politics are desiring some kind of evidence that suggests, the winds are blowing in one direction or the other. But unfortunately, it is not the kind of by-election that even will tell us that. Right? The Liberals are, by all means, running a star candidate in this case. I think if the Liberals lose, then yes, we have a lot to discuss about the kind of writing that this is and the way that this opens up an opportunity for Conservatives to gain the same kind of grounds that they gained in 2011 when they won the majority, because that was in the moment. But if the Liberals do indeed end up winning this with Charles Sousa as their candidate, I'm not sure that we can draw enough conclusions from that. I'm not sure that we can actually walk away with anything that is particularly satisfying about Pierre Poilievre or his potential or his performance in the GTA.
Would Chantal, yeah, go ahead, Althia. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think we will be able to draw a lot of stuff no matter what happens, right? Like, what is the vote for the PPC? What is the vote for the Conservatives? This is the friendliest Mississauga riding towards the Conservatives. If you think back after 2011 when the Conservatives won it, for a long time, it was held by a man named Paul Szabo. And Paul Szabo was to the right, like a blue liberal, a social conservative, a man who once told me that women shouldn't drink because you never know when you might be pregnant. This is a particular writing. So it will be interesting, those people that we talk about who feel like maybe the Liberals are too far to the left, have they progressed to Pierre Poilievre? Has Mr. Poilievre been able to reach beyond, the convoy type and reach towards, the center-right voters?
Yeah,
I think we will be reading in the tea leaves a lot more than we're probably suggesting.
Yeah, those are awfully good points. Yeah, Chantal.
And if you can't win in a by-election in a conservative-friendly riding, how are you going to form government? because that is the ridings that you need to win. And if you can't do it when people are hurting with inflation, then you need to rethink your approach to how you're trying to make your tent bigger, or realize that maybe the tent that you like so much is full of people who already like you, and there are not enough of them.
Andrew?
I entirely agree that this is the kind of riding the Conservatives have to win in the general election. In the by-election, Liberals win is the dog bites man story. Conservatives win is the man bites dog story.
Yeah, I would say that there some Conservatives that I've spoken to seem concerned about the lack of momentum from Pierre Poilievre. That because he's talking, to Chantal's point, to a particular groups in communications, that he's not out there everywhere, and they're a little bit worried that he's running out of steam. So does he, if something happens Monday, Chantal, does he adjust the strategy?
Me, I think, from where I sit, and I with no knowledge, that what happened yesterday, that scrum, is part of a reset that you wouldn't want to do on the morning after a defeat in a by-election.
Elamin?
I think that's right. I think like the idea that they're poised to, at least at a certain point, begin to speak to mainstream media because they're realizing that the base is already locked down. They have very effective ways of communicating to them, but that's not the people that they need to reach. This is a kind of by-election where you do test that message and test that a broader approach to how you reach new people. I don't know if it's going to work, but we'll find out on Monday.
Althia?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think people will readjust. I remember Jenny Byrne, who's one of Pierre Poilievre's advisor, but used to work for Stephen Harper, used to tell me, by-elections don't really matter. They're just a referendum in time, and people are always upset with the government, and they take advantage of by-elections to voice their disapproval. Yeah. But I'm sure that is not the messaging that we will get on Monday if Mr. Poilievre manages to win this. Another thing that is notable is that Mr. Poilievre has not been incredibly present in the riding, right? If they really thought that they were going to win, you would see him with the candidate. He would be in the news all the time, locally on that front. So, I'm not sure they think that they have it locked in.
Okay, but to Andrew's point, just to go back to that, it's a Liberal-held riding and has been for a long time. So it
absolutely,
it's
the Liberals
to lose. Yeah, exactly. Okay, thanks everybody. Before we go, it is that time of year when we want to hear from you. So send us your smart political questions about the whole last year, what you want to know about what happened or what is to come. You can email us at thenational@cbc.ca or message us on Instagram @CBCTheNational. We will put them to this smart group in the next couple of weeks.